Helen Martin had worked at Maple and Thyme Diner for almost 17 years. A quiet woman in her early 42nds, she blended into the background like wallpaper. She wasn't loud. She didn't gossip. She arrived early, stayed late, and kept her apron folded neatly beside her weathered recipe book, a faded red journal passed down by her late mother. Her co-workers saw her as dependable, if invisible. But they didn't know what Helen did every day at exactly 12:15 p.m. and again at 8:45 p.m. Rain or shine, she would quietly wrap a sandwich, a piece of fruit, and a small carton of milk, slide a handwritten note inside, and place the brown paper bag near the alley behind the diner. That food wasn't for a customer. It wasn't leftover stock. It came from her own daily meal allowance, which every staff member was entitled to. Helen simply gave hers away. No one had to tell her. She noticed the boy years ago. Maybe 7, with curly hair and a too-thin frame. He never begged, never spoke, just waited silently, always keeping his distance, eyes cast downward. Some of the staff called him a stray, a shadow. Helen just called him Sweetheart. She never asked his name, never pried into his story. "I don't need to know why he's there," she once told the dishwasher. "I just need to know he isn't hungry." People whispered behind her back. The manager rolled his eyes. "This isn't a soup kitchen," he'd say. Helen would nod, apologize softly, and do it again the next day. Because while the world moved fast and forgot the small things, Helen remembered. She saw the hunger, and every day she chose to do something about it. The boy never said a word. He came at the same time every day, noon and nightfall. He'd emerge from the far side of the alley, wait behind the dumpster, and approach only after Helen disappeared inside again. His presence was ghost-like, quiet, nearly invisible to others. But Helen noticed everything. She began writing tiny notes on scraps of napkin and slipping them inside the brown paper bag. Simple messages like, "Stay warm today, sweetheart," or "It might rain, find cover." He never replied, but she saw that he kept the notes. One evening, she caught a glimpse of him folding one neatly and tucking it into his shirt pocket like a treasure. Sometimes she added little extras, half a chocolate bar, a boiled egg, a pair of clean socks when winter came. She wasn't rich. She had no family. But for this boy, she gave what she could. And every time he took the bag, he gave her a slight bow, head dipped respectfully. That tiny gesture meant more than any word. Helen didn't tell anyone. The staff assumed she took her meal home. The manager, though suspicious, gave up asking. What mattered was that she always clocked in on time and never caused trouble. One day, she left the food out later than usual and panicked. She rushed to the back, heart racing, and there he was, still waiting. He hadn't left. That moment changed something inside her. She realized that even if he didn't speak, even if he didn't stay, he trusted her. And in a world full of people who walked past each other without a glance, that trust, silent and invisible, was a bond stronger than any words could say. One evening, after a long shift and sore feet, Helen went to leave the usual paper bag near the alley. But as she bent down, something caught her eye. There was a napkin tucked under a small stone, sitting exactly where she always placed the bag. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Written in a shaky, unsure hand were 4 simple words. "Thank you, Miss Helen." She stared at it for a long time. It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged her by name. Tears welled up in her eyes. It had been years since anyone had thanked her like that, not for serving tables, not for staying overtime, not for sweeping the kitchen alone on weekends. But this boy, this child she knew nothing about, had written to her with more sincerity than anyone else in her life. She folded the note with care and placed it into the back pocket of her notebook, alongside the recipes. That napkin became her most treasured possession. After that day, the boy started leaving tiny gestures in return. One time, a wildflower tucked in a soda bottle. Another day, a small handmade paper crane. No words, just quiet, thoughtful gifts that meant the world to her. She began to wonder about him, who he was, where he slept, whether he had someone looking for him. But she never pushed. She respected the quiet space between them, fragile and sacred. Each day she showed up for work a little earlier, just to make his meal extra warm. And each evening she left with a little more purpose, because even if the world didn't notice her kindness, she knew that one boy did, and that was enough to keep her going. One cold January morning, Helen stepped outside with the usual brown paper bag. The wind stung her face, and her fingers were numb from the chill. She placed the bag gently behind the dumpster, added a new pair of mittens inside, and waited by the kitchen door. But he didn't come. For the first time in years, the boy didn't appear at noon. She waited, pretending to wipe down surfaces near the back, eyes darting toward the alley every few minutes. At 9 p.m., she returned with his evening meal. Still nothing. Her chest tightened. Had something happened? That night, Helen barely slept. She thought of every possible scenario: illness, danger, relocation. She prayed silently in her tiny apartment, clutching the napkin note he'd once left her. The next day, and the one after that, the routine repeated. Food left. No one came. Silence where there had once been soft footsteps. 2 weeks passed. Helen still left meals, now with even more care, in case he returned. She started adding small notes. I miss you. Please stay safe. I'm here. Then, on the 15th day, something changed. Instead of the bag sitting untouched, she found it missing, and in its place, another napkin, folded carefully. She opened it slowly. The words, written in neat but uneven letters, read, I'm okay. I have to go. Thank you for everything. She stood frozen, the paper trembling in her hands. It felt like both a goodbye and a gift. Her eyes stung, but she smiled. He hadn't forgotten her. He remembered, and wherever he was trying to stand on his own. Helen held the note to her heart and whispered, Be safe, sweetheart. Always. After the boy's final note, Helen kept leaving meals for a while. Hope has a stubborn way of staying alive even when logic says otherwise. But as weeks turned into months, she slowly accepted the truth. He wasn't coming back. Life went on. Customers came and went. The diner changed owners. New servers arrived, full of energy and attitude. They called her Auntie Helen, unaware of the quiet story that had unfolded behind the kitchen wall for a decade. But Helen never forgot. She still kept that napkin note tucked into her red recipe journal. On rainy days, she would take it out, read it slowly, and smile to herself. It reminded her that her life, though quiet and often overlooked, had meant something to someone. Sometimes she wondered where he went. Did he find a shelter, a family, a job? Was he safe? Did he ever think of her? Years passed, and eventually Helen retired. No farewell party, no gifts, just a quiet thank you from the new manager and a final paycheck. She packed her belongings into a cardboard box, apron, recipe book, a few utensils, and stepped outside the diner one last time. The wind was cold, and the city lights flickered like old memories. But just as she turned the corner, she paused. Taped to the alley wall, in the exact spot where she used to leave the meals, was a single photograph. It showed a young man in a graduation cap, holding a sign that read, For Miss Helen. I made it. Helen's hands flew to her mouth. Tears rolled freely. He remembered. And he had made it. Her small kindness had grown into something far bigger than she ever imagined. 3 years after Helen's retirement, something unexpected happened. A video began circulating on social media. A young man, strong, confident, yet humble, had saved an elderly man during a snowstorm. The man had collapsed near a bus stop. While bystanders panicked, the young man carried him to the nearest hospital on foot. It turned out the old man was having a stroke. But what stunned the internet wasn't just his bravery. It was what happened next. When the doctors called out for AB negative blood, an extremely rare type, no donor could be found. The young man immediately stepped forward and said, I have that type. Use mine. The doctor posted a photo of the young man sitting in the donation chair, IV in his arm, calm and determined. His caption read, We asked if he wanted to stay anonymous. He said no. He wanted to dedicate the moment to a woman named Helen. She fed me every day for 10 years, he said. She taught me what it means to care. Helen never used social media, but her neighbor's granddaughter recognized her name and face from an old picture. She showed Helen the video on her phone. At first, Helen couldn't believe it. But the second she saw his eyes, that gentle, steady gaze, she knew. It was him. The boy from the alley, all grown up. She gasped, hand over her mouth, as memories rushed back like a tidal wave. The paper bags, the cold nights, the quiet gratitude. He hadn't just survived. He had become someone the world was noticing, and he was carrying her name with him. She stared at the screen, voice trembling, and whispered, Sweetheart, you really did make it. A week after seeing the video, Helen received an envelope in the mail. Thick cream paper, embossed gold lettering, and a card that read, You are warmly invited to the grand opening of Evan's table. Her hands trembled. Inside was a handwritten letter. The opening line stopped her breath. Dear Miss Helen, There are no words for what you gave me, but I hope this place speaks for both of us. He had signed it, with love and gratitude, Evan Lewis. Helen stared at the name for a long time. Evan. She had never known his name all those years. He had once been a nameless shadow. Now he was a man with a purpose, a name, and a mission. The grand opening was in the city, just a few miles from her old diner. Curious but unsure, she dressed in her best clothes, a blue cardigan and her mother's silver brooch, and arrived quietly. What she saw stunned her. A beautiful new restaurant stood where an abandoned warehouse used to be. Above the door, a glowing sign read, "Evan's Table, where no one eats alone." As she stepped inside, dozens of heads turned. A staff member approached gently and asked, "Are you Miss Helen?" She nodded hesitantly. "Please come. He's been waiting for you." Inside, the space glowed with warmth. Wooden beams, handwritten menus and long community tables filled the room. Photos of volunteers lined the walls, and at the center, a large frame of Helen, smiling in her apron. Just then the crowd parted. A tall young man in a tailored shirt stood by the kitchen. He saw her. His eyes softened. He walked forward, stopped in front of her and whispered, "You remember me?" Her answer came in tears. As the applause faded, Evan led Helen to a quiet corner of the restaurant. The staff watched respectfully, knowing who she was. From under the table, Evan pulled out a small wooden box, aged but polished. He handed it to her gently. Inside were dozens of napkins and folded papers, every note she had ever written him. Some were stained, others faded, but each one carefully preserved. "I saved every single one," Evan said softly. "Even before I could read them, I knew they mattered." Helen's hands trembled as she picked one up. It read, "Stay safe, sweetheart. I made you a sandwich with extra cheese today." She smiled through her tears. "You remembered?" "I never forgot," Evan replied. "I'm only here because of you." Then he turned toward the kitchen and clapped once. A man in a suit walked out holding a framed certificate. "This restaurant is yours," Evan said. Helen blinked. "What?" "I registered it in your name. You don't have to run it. Just know it belongs to you, like it always did in spirit." Gasps and cheers followed. Helen could hardly breathe. All she'd ever done was feed a child. And now she stood in a place born from that small daily act of kindness. The certificate read, "Helen Martin, founder and guardian of Evan's Table, where every child is seen, heard, and fed." Her knees almost gave out. Evan caught her gently and said, "You gave me more than food. You gave me dignity." In a world that often forgot its quiet heroes, Helen was now honored not with gold or fame, but with something far deeper. Legacy. Months passed, and Evan's Table became a sensation. Not because of its food, though the dishes were delicious, but because of its mission. Each day, a portion of the meals were prepared for the homeless, no questions asked. Volunteers delivered warm food across shelters and back alleys, always with a handwritten note. The media caught wind of the story. From brown bags to big impact, one woman's kindness built a movement. Helen never sought the spotlight. She still lived in her small apartment, still wore her favorite cardigan. But every afternoon, she came to Evan's Table, sat at the same corner seat, and helped write notes for the to-go meals. Her handwriting, slightly tilted, soft and familiar, had become a symbol. "Eat well, sweetheart, you matter." One day a young girl walked in, clutching a wrinkled napkin. "My brother found this behind the shelter," she said. "He said it made him feel like someone loved him." Helen bent down, smiled warmly and whispered, "Then he's already halfway home." Evan stood by the door, watching. A man who once had nothing now gave everything. And at the heart of it all stood Helen, a woman the world once overlooked. A woman who gave a quiet kindness every day for 10 years. A woman whose love fed more than stomachs, it fed souls. Her story spread across countries, schools, hospitals. People began leaving meals in public places with notes signed from Helen. It became a movement, a whisper of compassion that echoed worldwide. Because in the end, it wasn't about the food. It was about being seen, being cared for. And Helen had shown the world what a single paper bag could do.